And I said she shouldn't even be here. Look at her.
The words sliced through the warm afternoon air of Bellamy's Riverside Bistro, like a blade through silk. Grace Morrison's hands stilled on the pitcher of sweet tea she was refilling, ice cubes suspended mid-clink against crystal. She didn't turn toward the voice, not yet. 23 years of waitressing had taught her that immediate eye contact with certain customers was like throwing gasoline on embers. "Philip, lower your voice," another man murmured, but there was no real conviction in it, just the performative embarrassment of someone who wanted credit for objecting without actually doing anything about it. Grace set the pitcher down with practiced gentleness on table 7's white linen cloth, every movement calibrated to be invisible, professional, beneath notice. But her jaw tightened imperceptibly. She knew what was coming. She'd felt it building since the Carmichael party had walked in 40 minutes earlier. A group of 5 men in tailored suits that cost more than her car, their presence filling the restaurant's garden terrace like they owned not just their reserved section, but the very air everyone else was breathing. "I'm serious, Robert," Philip Carmichael continued, and now Grace could hear the particular strain of indignation that belonged exclusively to people who'd never been told no in their entire lives. "This is supposed to be a distinguished establishment. I bring clients here. I bring international clients here. And now we have that serving food." Grace finally turned, her expression a masterpiece of neutral professionalism that had taken years to perfect. She was a tall woman, 37 years old, with deep brown skin that caught the dappled sunlight filtering through the terrace's magnolia trees. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun. Her uniform was spotless. There was absolutely nothing about her appearance that justified the contempt radiating from Philip Carmichael's pale, flushed face. But Grace knew, had always known, that justification was never the point. "Can I get you gentlemen anything else?" she asked, her voice level, professional, giving him nothing to grasp onto. Philip's lip curled. He was perhaps 45, with the kind of soft physique that came from expensive gym memberships that went largely unused. His suit was charcoal gray, his tie probably cost $300, and his eyes held that particular emptiness that Grace had learned to recognize in certain wealthy people, the void where empathy should have lived. "What you can get us," Philip said slowly, deliberately, "is a different server. Surely this restaurant has someone more appropriate to handle our table." The terrace went quiet. Not completely, the fountain in the corner kept burbling. Birds still sang in the magnolia branches, but that particular quality of human silence that descends when everyone nearby is suddenly pretending very hard not to be, listening while actually listening to every single word. Grace felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the heat that started in her stomach and threatened to rise into her throat as rage. She'd been here before. Different restaurants, different cities, same script. The muscle memory of humiliation was powerful, persistent, carved into her body by 1,000 small cuts over decades. But what Philip Carmichael didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Grace Morrison wasn't just a waitress. She was also the woman who'd put herself through nursing school while raising 2 kids alone. She was the woman who'd spent 3 years volunteering at a pediatric physical therapy clinic every Saturday. She was the woman who'd published 2 papers on adaptive dance therapy for children with mobility challenges in peer-reviewed journals. And she was the woman who, just 14 months ago, had been personally recruited by the National Institute of Therapeutic Movement to help develop new protocols for working with disabled children. Grace kept all of this hidden beneath her server's apron, the way a soldier might carry a concealed weapon, something powerful, potentially devastating, held in reserve for the exact right moment. This wasn't that moment, not yet. "I apologize if I've done something to upset you, sir," Grace said, the words tasting like ash but coming out smooth as honey. "I'd be happy to send Jennifer over." "Oh, don't play wounded," Philip interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "This isn't personal. It's simply a matter of standards. When I'm paying $200 per person for lunch, I expect a certain caliber of service. I expect—" "Dad?" The small voice came from behind Philip, and every head on the terrace turned. She was perhaps 7 years old, maybe 8, with blonde hair that fell in soft waves past her shoulders and eyes the color of a summer sky. She sat in a specialized wheelchair, not the standard medical model, but something custom, sleek, painted a cheerful yellow. Her legs were thin beneath her pink cotton dress, braced with the kind of orthotic supports that Grace recognized immediately from her clinical work. Cerebral palsy, most likely, affecting her lower extremities, but clearly not her sharp, intelligent gaze. And despite everything, despite the ugliness that had just poured from Philip Carmichael's mouth, that little girl was smiling. "Daddy, that music," she said, her words slightly slurred, but perfectly comprehensible to anyone actually listening. Can we? That's when Grace noticed it. Somewhere inside the restaurant, probably from the bar area, someone had turned on music. Something with a gentle rhythm, a sweet melody, something you could dance to. Philip's face transformed in an instant, the contempt evaporating to be replaced by something that might have been tenderness if it wasn't so thoroughly entangled with embarrassment. "Sweetheart, we've talked about this. Not in public. It's not appropriate." The little girl's face fell, but only for a moment. Then her eyes tracked across the terrace and landed on Grace with the kind of direct, unfiltered curiosity that only children possess. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying that slight tremor of someone who'd been disappointed many times, but hadn't yet learned to stop hoping. "Do you dance?" Grace felt something shift in her chest, a click, like a key turning in a lock. She looked at this child in her yellow wheelchair, at Philip Carmichael's reddening face, at the 4 other businessmen who were suddenly very interested in their water glasses, at the dozen other diners on the terrace who were still pretending not to watch. And Grace Morrison made a choice. "I do dance," Grace said, and she walked away from Philip Carmichael's table, moved directly to the little girl's wheelchair, and crouched down so they were eye to eye. "My name is Grace. What's yours?" "Lily," the girl whispered, and her whole face illuminated. "Lily Hartwell." "Lily Hartwell," Grace repeated, as if testing the weight of the name. "That's a beautiful name. And you know what, Lily Hartwell? I would be honored if you'd dance with me." Philip Carmichael stood up so fast his chair scraped against the stone patio. "Now wait you can't just, she's disabled, she can't." "Philip." The voice that cut him off was quiet but carried absolute authority. It came from a man who'd been sitting 2 tables away, someone Grace hadn't particularly noticed before. He was older than Philip by perhaps 15 years, with steel-gray hair and a weathered face that spoke of actual work rather than the cosmetic exhaustion of too many business dinners. He stood slowly, deliberately, and walked toward them with the measured pace of someone who knew that power didn't need to rush. He was also, Grace noted with the pattern recognition that came from years of service work, wearing a suit that made Philip's expensive ensemble look like something from a discount rack. This was bespoke tailoring, the kind that cost 5 figures and required 3 fittings with a master craftsman. "Mr. Hartwell," Philip sputtered, and the sudden deference in his voice told Grace everything she needed to know about the hierarchy at play here. We were having a private conversation, and this waitress, that's my daughter you're talking about," the older man said, his voice still quiet, but now carrying an edge that could cut diamonds. "That's Lily, my daughter. And I think I'd very much like to see her dance." The silence that descended on the terrace now was different, heavier, charged with the kind of electricity that precedes a thunderstorm. Grace understood several things in that moment. First, that the little girl in the yellow wheelchair was not Philip Carmichael's daughter, but his niece, or perhaps the daughter of his employer. Second, that the older man, Mr. Hartwell, was almost certainly someone very important, someone whose opinion could make or break careers. And third, that she'd just inadvertently walked into the middle of a family dynamic that was infinitely more complicated than she'd initially perceived. But Lily was looking up at her with those bright blue eyes, and the music was still playing, and Grace had already made her choice. "If you'll permit me," Grace said, addressing Mr. Hartwell directly with the respect his calm authority commanded, "I have some experience with adaptive movement therapy. I'd like to show Lily a few techniques, if that's all right with you." Something flickered in Hartwell's eyes, surprise, maybe, or recognition. "You're qualified." "I've worked with children like Lily for 7 years, Grace said simply. "Published researcher, clinical volunteer, but right now, I'm just someone who'd like to dance with a little girl who asked me very nicely." Hartwell studied her for a long moment, and Grace had the distinct sensation of being X-rayed, of having every credential and secret motivation examined in the space of 3 heartbeats. Then he nodded just once. "Please," he said, "show me." Grace turned back to Lily, whose excitement was barely contained, her small hands gripping the arms of her wheelchair. "Okay, Miss Lily," Grace said, her voice dropping into the gentle, encouraging tone she'd perfected in the pediatric clinic. "Here's what we're going to do. Dancing isn't just about legs. Dancing is about feeling the music in your whole body, your arms, your shoulders, your head, even your heart, especially your heart. Can you feel the rhythm?" Lily nodded vigorously. "Good. Now, I'm going to kneel here beside you, and we're going to move together. You're going to show me how you dance, and I'm going to dance with you. Sound good?" Another nod, more enthusiastic this time. Grace positioned herself beside the wheelchair, and as the music continued its gentle flow, she began to move. She started with her arms, raising them slowly, gracefully, in movements that Lily could mirror. The little girl's arms came up too, her movements less precise but filled with such pure joy that it didn't matter. Grace swayed her shoulders, and Lily swayed hers. Grace tilted her head to the rhythm, and Lily copied her, giggling now. But Grace was doing something more sophisticated than simple mimicry. She was watching Lily's body, reading the specific limitations of her condition. The cerebral palsy had affected Lily's lower limbs primarily, creating spasticity and reduced control, but her upper body showed remarkable strength and coordination. Grace adjusted her movements to emphasize what Lily could do rather than what she couldn't, creating a dance vocabulary that was uniquely theirs. "Now," Grace said, her voice low and encouraging, "let's add a twist. When I say spin, you're going to move your shoulders like this, see? Like you're doing a little twist in your chair, and I'm going to spin around you. We'll be like a flower and butterfly. You're the flower, strong and beautiful, and I'm the butterfly circling around you." "Okay," Lily practically shouted, and Grace couldn't help but smile. "Spin," Grace said. Lily twisted her shoulders as much as her body allowed, and Grace rose smoothly to her feet, moving in a graceful circle around the wheelchair, her movements flowing and deliberate. They were dancing, truly dancing, and the beauty of it was undeniable. Hartwell stood watching, and Grace saw his expression shift. The hard edges softened. Something that might have been pain flickered in his eyes, followed quickly by something else. Wonder, maybe, or hope. Philip Carmichael, meanwhile, looked like he'd swallowed something poisonous. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, but no one was listening to him anymore. Grace and Lily continued their dance, moving through several iterations of the pattern, each one slightly more complex. Grace was assessing as she moved, her clinical training operating in parallel with her performance. Lily had good trunk control, excellent motivation, and clearly had been exposed to some physical therapy, but probably not nearly enough. The wheelchair was top of the line, which suggested money wasn't the barrier. Something else was keeping this child from reaching her full potential. As the song wound down, Grace completed one final circle and returned to her kneeling position beside Lily's chair. Both of them were breathing a little harder, and Lily's face was flushed with exertion and absolute delight. "That was amazing," Lily breathed. "That was the best dance I've ever had." Grace's heart twisted. The best dance she'd ever had. And it had been maybe 90 seconds of movement in a restaurant garden. What kind of life had this child been living? "You're a natural," Grace said, and meant it. "You have wonderful rhythm and beautiful movement. I bet if you practiced, you could do even more incredible things." "Really?" Lily's eyes were huge. "Do you really think so?" "I know so," Grace said firmly. Hartwell cleared his throat, and Grace looked up to find him standing much closer now, his expression unreadable but intense. "Miss Morrison, Grace Morrison. Miss Morrison, I'd like to speak with you. Would you be available after your shift?" Philip Carmichael made a sound like a strangled goose. "You can't be serious. Robert, she's a waitress. She was completely inappropriate. She disrupted our business lunch. "Philip," Hartwell said, not even looking at him, his eyes still locked on Grace. "You're fired." The terrace went silent again, but this time it was the silence of shock, of witnessing something unprecedented. What? You can't. I've been with Hartwell Industries for 8 years. I've brought in $30 million in You insulted a woman for the color of her skin, Hartwell said, his voice still quiet, but now carrying a weight that seemed to physically press Philip backward. You did it in public, in front of my daughter, and you did it with such casual cruelty that I have to assume this is not the first time. You're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building when we return to the office. HR will be in contact about your severance package, which will be minimal, I assure you. Philip's face went from red to white to red again. You're making a mistake. You're letting some diversity stunt ruin your judgment. In a week, you'll realize— In a week, Hartwell interrupted. I'll realize that I should have done this years ago. Get out of my sight. Philip Carmichael stood there for another moment, opening and closing his mouth like a fish drowning in air, before finally turning and stalking off the terrace. The other businessmen who'd been at his table were looking at each other with barely concealed panic, clearly trying to calculate whether they were implicated in his downfall. Hartwell ignored them entirely. He turned back to Grace, and now his expression was easier to read. Gratitude, yes, but also curiosity and calculation. This was a man who solved problems, Grace realized. A man who saw an opportunity and seized it. Miss Morrison, he said, I own Hartwell Industries. We're a medical device and pharmaceutical company focused on improving quality of life for people with mobility challenges. And, unless I'm very much mistaken, you're not just a waitress who happens to be good with children. Grace stood slowly, brushing off her apron. She met his gaze levelly. I have a master's degree in therapeutic movement, she said. I've published research on adaptive dance therapy for children with cerebral palsy and other neurological conditions. I've worked with over 300 children in clinical settings. And yes, I'm also a waitress because research positions don't pay very well, and I have 2 children in college. Hartwell's eyes widened fractionally, the only sign of surprise he allowed himself. Why didn't you say something? Why let that man talk to you that way? Grace felt something bitter rise in her throat. With respect, Mr. Hartwell, I've found that explaining my credentials to people like Philip Carmichael doesn't actually change anything. They've already decided who I am based on what they see. My degrees don't make me more human in their eyes. They just make me an anomaly to be explained away. The truth of that statement hung in the air between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Hartwell nodded slowly. You're right, he said, and I apologize, not just for Philip, though I'm deeply sorry for his behavior, but for every time someone like him has made you feel like you had to hide who you are to survive their judgment. Grace blinked, surprised by the directness of the apology, by its specificity. This was not a man making performative gestures. This was genuine acknowledgement. Thank you, she said quietly. Grace, Lily's small voice drew their attention back to her. Does this mean you have to go back to work now? Can't we dance more? Hartwell looked at his daughter, and Grace saw the raw love there, complicated by worry and what looked like helplessness. Sweetheart, Miss Grace has other tables to serve. We can't monopolize her time. But Grace was thinking. The pieces were connecting in her mind. A wealthy man whose company focused on mobility solutions, a daughter with cerebral palsy who lit up like the sun when someone engaged her in movement, and a recently fired executive who'd probably been enforcing some kind of limiting belief system about what disabled children should or shouldn't do in public. Actually, Grace said slowly, if you're serious about wanting to talk, Mr. Hartwell, I finish my shift in 90 minutes, and I think I might have some ideas that could interest you. Hartwell studied her again with that penetrating gaze. Then he smiled, a real smile, the kind that transformed his entire face. I'm very serious, Miss Morrison. In fact, why don't you consider yourself off duty as of now? I'll square it with the management. We have a lot to discuss. From the edge of the terrace, Grace saw her manager, Daniel, hovering uncertainly. She caught his eye, and he hurried over, looking nervous. Mr. Hartwell, Daniel said, his voice obsequious in the way of service industry managers everywhere when confronted with serious wealth. Is everything all right? I heard there was some kind of disturbance. Everything is perfect, Hartwell said smoothly. Miss Morrison has provided exceptional service to my family. In fact, I'm going to need to steal her for a business discussion. I trust that won't be a problem. Daniel's eyes went wide as he clearly calculated the potential tip, the potential future business, the potential disaster of saying no to this request. Of course not. Grace, you're free to go. Take all the time you need. Grace untied her apron, folding it with automatic precision, born of thousands of repetitions. She felt strange, unmoored, like the script of her life had suddenly been rewritten without her consent. "Thank you, Daniel," she said, then turned back to Hartwell and Lily. "Where would you like to have this conversation?" "There's a private dining room inside," Hartwell said. "More comfortable for Lily, and we won't be interrupted." He paused, then added, "And please, call me Robert." They moved inside, Grace walking beside Lily's wheelchair, while Robert Hartwell led the way. Other diners watched their procession with undisguised curiosity. Word had clearly spread about the confrontation on the terrace. Grace felt their eyes on her, felt the weight of their judgment and fascination, and chose to ignore it entirely. She'd had years of practice. The private dining room was exactly what Grace expected. Elegant without being ostentatious, with a large mahogany table, leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. Robert gestured for Grace to sit, then positioned Lily's wheelchair at the head of the table so she could see everyone. "First things first," Robert said, settling into his own chair, with a slight wince that suggested old back pain. "Lily, sweetheart, I need to apologize to you." Lily looked confused. "Why, Daddy?" "Because Uncle Philip was very rude to Miss Grace, and I should have stopped him sooner. I should never have let him speak to anyone that way, especially not in front of you. It was wrong, and I'm sorry you had to hear it." Lily considered this with the seriousness of a child who'd been taught to think carefully about important things. "Uncle Philip is mean sometimes," she said finally. "He tells me I shouldn't want to do things. He says I need to accept my limitations." She pronounced this last word carefully, like something she'd heard many times but didn't fully understand. Robert's jaw tightened, and Grace saw real anger there, not the hot, explosive kind that Philip had displayed, but something colder and more dangerous. "Uncle Philip," he said slowly, "was wrong about a great many things, and he won't be around anymore to say those things to you." "Good," Lily said with perfect child logic. "I like Miss Grace better." Despite everything, Grace laughed. "I like you too, Lily." Robert turned his attention fully to Grace now, and she could practically see him shifting into business mode, the same assessment he had done on the terrace, but more thorough now, more systematic. "Tell me about your research," he said. "Specifically, tell me about adaptive dance therapy." Grace took a breath, organizing her thoughts. This was familiar territory, safe ground. "The fundamental premise," she began, "is that traditional physical therapy, while effective, often treats the body as a machine to be fixed rather than a person to be engaged. Children with cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, or other mobility challenges can benefit enormously from conventional therapy, but they often resist it because it's boring, repetitive, and focused on deficits rather than abilities." She leaned forward slightly, warming to her subject. "Dance therapy approaches the same goals, improving range of motion, building strength, enhancing coordination, but through creative movement that the child actually enjoys. We're not trying to make them normal. We're trying to help them discover what their unique body can do and celebrate that." Robert nodded slowly. "And your research showed this was effective? More effective than traditional therapy alone in several key metrics," Grace said. "We documented significant improvements in gross motor function, but also, and this is crucial, massive improvements in self-esteem, body image, and social engagement. Children who'd been withdrawn and depressed became animated and confident. Parents reported better behavior, better sleep, better overall quality of life." She paused, making sure she had his full attention. "The physical improvements matter, obviously, but the psychological and emotional benefits are just as important, maybe more important. A child who believes they can do something will try harder, persist longer, and achieve more than a child who's been taught that they're broken." Something passed across Robert's face: pain, recognition, regret. "Lily has had excellent physical therapy," he said quietly. "The best money can buy, state-of-the-art facility, top specialists. But she hates it. She cries every session, and over the past year, I've watched her become more and more withdrawn, like she's giving up." Grace looked at Lily, who was tracing patterns on the table with one finger, pretending not to listen, but clearly absorbing every word. "May I ask you something direct?" Grace said. Robert nodded. "Who's been telling her to accept her limitations?" Robert's expression darkened. Philip wasn't the only one. My late wife's family. They mean well, but they have very traditional views about disability, about what's appropriate, what's possible. They worry about Lily being embarrassed or hurt if she tries to do things they think she can't manage. They've been very vocal about it. And you? Grace asked. What do you think? Robert looked at his daughter, and Grace saw the love there, fierce and protective, and complicated by uncertainty. I think I've been so afraid of her getting hurt, physically or emotionally, that I've let other people's limitations become her limitations. I think I've failed her. Daddy, Lily said softly, I'm not sad at you. Robert reached over and took her small hand in his larger one. Thank you, sweetheart, but I'm sad at me. Grace let the moment settle before speaking again. Mr. Hartwell, Robert, what exactly are you proposing here? You said you wanted to talk, but I'm not entirely sure what about. Robert straightened, and now Grace could see the businessman fully emerge. I want to hire you, he said bluntly. I want to create a new division within Hartwell Industries focused on therapeutic movement programs. Not just for Lily, though she'd certainly benefit, but for children everywhere who are being told to accept limitations that might not actually exist. I want you to design the programs, train the staff, conduct the research, and prove that there's a better way. Grace felt her heart skip. That's a massive undertaking. That's years of work, millions of dollars of investment. I have years and millions of dollars, Robert said simply. What I don't have is someone with your expertise, your passion, and your lived experience of being underestimated. What I don't have is someone who looked at my daughter and saw possibility instead of disability. That's what I'm willing to pay for. Grace's mind was racing. This was the kind of opportunity that researchers dreamed about. Unlimited funding, institutional support, the ability to actually implement her ideas rather than just writing papers that maybe 5 people would read. This was the chance to help not just Lily, but potentially thousands of children like her. But there was something else too, something more personal. Why me? Grace asked. You don't really know me. You've seen me dance with your daughter for 90 seconds and heard a 2-minute summary of my credentials. For all you know, I'm completely incompetent. Robert smiled slightly. I didn't become successful by making quick decisions without good reason, he said. In the past hour, I've learned several important things about you, Grace Morrison. First, you have grace under pressure, no pun intended. Philip was vicious, and you didn't respond with anger or defensiveness. You maintained your professionalism even when you had every right to tell him exactly what you thought of him. He held up a second finger. Second, you recognized what Lily needed before I did, and you acted on it without asking permission or hedging. That shows initiative and confidence. Third, your approach with Lily demonstrated real expertise. You weren't just playing, you were assessing her capabilities and adapting your movements accordingly. I watched you. You knew exactly what you were doing. A third finger. Fourth, you've achieved significant academic and professional success while working full-time in service industry. That takes discipline and determination that most people don't possess. And fifth, he paused, his expression becoming more serious. Fifth, you stood up for my daughter's right to dance even when you had no idea who I was or whether it would cost you your job. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Grace felt something tight in her chest loosen. She'd spent so many years being invisible, being underestimated, being reduced to assumptions and stereotypes. Hearing someone articulate her actual qualities, her real capabilities, was almost overwhelming. I need to think about it, she said, though part of her wanted to say yes immediately. It's a lot. I have obligations, my current job, my children. Of course, Robert said immediately. Take all the time you need. But know that I'm serious about this. I'll have my lawyers draw up a contract proposal. You'll have complete control over the program design, generous salary and benefits, and resources to build whatever team you need. This isn't charity, Grace. This is me recognizing talent and capability when I see it. That's what I do. Lily had been watching this exchange with wide eyes, and now she spoke up. Does that mean Miss Grace would be my teacher? Like, all the time? Robert looked at Grace, the question hanging between them. Grace thought about her cramped apartment, her student loans, the double shifts she pulled to make rent. She thought about the research proposals that had been rejected because she didn't have institutional affiliation. She thought about the hundreds of children she'd worked with in clinical settings, helping them for a few sessions before they moved on, and she never knew what happened to them. And she thought about Lily, this bright, capable little girl who'd been taught to hide herself, to minimize her joy, to accept limitations that maybe didn't need to exist. If I take this position, Grace said slowly, I would want Lily to be part of the pilot program, yes. But not just Lily. We'd need other children too. A diverse group with different conditions, different backgrounds. And I'd want their families involved, because this kind of work doesn't happen in isolation. The whole family system has to support the child's development. Robert was nodding before she finished. Agreed. Completely agreed. What else? I'd want to publish our findings, Grace continued. The idea's flowing now. Real research, peer-reviewed, replicable, not just promotional material for the company. If this works, other people need to be able to implement it. We can't help everyone directly, but we can create a model that others can follow. Done, Robert said. What else? I'd want to partner with existing therapy facilities and children's hospitals, Grace said. We shouldn't be competing with traditional physical therapy. We should be complementing it. The goal is to give children more tools, not to replace one approach with another. Absolutely, Robert agreed. The medical device side of Hartwell already has relationships with most major hospitals. We can leverage those connections. Grace took a deep breath. And I'd want absolute protection from discrimination, not just for me, but for any staff I hire. If someone like Philip Carmichael has a problem with the color of my skin, or anyone else's, they don't get to be part of this program. Period. Robert's expression became fierce. Grace, you have my word. Not just my personal word, but the institutional commitment of the entire company. What Philip did today was unconscionable, and it represents everything I don't want Hartwell Industries to be. You'll have complete authority to build your team however you see fit, and anyone who objects will be removed immediately. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling around them. Through the windows, Grace could see the river flowing by, constant and implacable. The world kept moving, indifferent to the small dramas played out on restaurant terraces, indifferent to injustice and possibility alike. But people weren't indifferent. People made choices. People like Philip Carmichael chose cruelty and dismissal, and people like Robert Hartwell, at least today, in this moment, chose differently. I'll need 2 weeks to give notice at the restaurant, Grace said, and realized as she spoke that she'd made her decision. And I'll need to review any contract carefully before signing. But yes, Robert, I'm interested. I'm very interested. Robert's face broke into a genuine smile. 2 weeks is fine, and you'll have the contract by Friday. Fair? Fair, Grace agreed. Lily let out a squeal of delight. Yes, Miss Grace is going to teach me to dance. Real dancing. All the time. Grace laughed, some of the tension finally breaking. Well, not all the time. You still need regular therapy and school and time to just be a kid. But yes, we'll dance. A lot. Can we dance now? Lily asked, hopefully. Robert checked his watch. We actually need to get going, sweetheart. I have a board meeting in an hour and you have your tutoring session. Lily's face fell, but only for a moment. But Miss Grace will be my teacher soon, so it's okay to wait. That's very mature of you, Grace said, impressed. As they prepared to leave, Robert handed Grace a business card. My personal number is on there, he said. Call me if you have any questions or concerns before we formalize everything. And Grace, thank you. Not just for saying yes to the job, but for what you did for Lily today. You gave her something I'd been failing to give her, the belief that she's capable of joy, of movement, of being seen as who she is rather than what she can't do. Grace took the card, feeling its weight. She's a remarkable child, she said quietly. She deserves every opportunity. She does, Robert agreed. They all do. They walked together back through the restaurant, and Grace was acutely aware of the eyes following them, curious, judgmental, envious, approving. She'd walked this dining room 1,000 times as invisible labor, someone to be summoned with a snap of fingers and dismissed with equal ease. Now she walked as something different, a colleague, a professional, someone whose expertise had value beyond her ability to carry plates without spilling. It felt strange. It felt wonderful. It felt like something that could be snatched away at any moment if she wasn't careful. At the door, Robert paused. There's one more thing, he said. Philip isn't the only person who's going to object to this program, or to you leading it. There will be board members, investors, even some family members who think this is a waste of resources or a PR stunt. They'll question your credentials, your motives, your right to be in the position. It's going to be difficult. Grace met his eyes levelly. Robert, I've been black and female in America for 37 years. I've worked in kitchens and hospitals and universities. I've been questioned, dismissed, and underestimated more times than I can count. Difficult doesn't scare me. What scares me is playing it safe and regretting it later. Robert nodded slowly. Good, he said, because we're going to change some minds. We're going to prove that children like Lily deserve better than being told to accept limitations. And we're going to do it your way. They shook hands, a firm professional grip that felt like sealing a pact. Then Robert wheeled Lily toward the parking lot, and Grace watched them go, the wealthy businessman and his daughter heading back to their world of privilege and private tutors and board meetings. But now Grace was going to be part of that world too, not as invisible labor, but as someone with voice, with authority, with the power to actually implement her ideas. She stood there on the restaurant steps for a long moment, feeling the afternoon sun on her face, hearing the distant traffic and the nearby river and the beating of her own heart. Somewhere inside the restaurant, Daniel was probably having a minor panic attack about staffing. Somewhere across town, Philip Carmichael was probably raging about injustice and political correctness. Somewhere in the city, her 2 children were attending classes paid for by her endless double shifts and careful budgeting. And tomorrow, everything would start to change. Grace pulled out her phone and called her daughter first. Mom? Janelle answered on the second ring, sounding worried. Grace never called during work hours. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, baby, Grace said, and heard her own voice shaking slightly. Everything's really good, actually. I have some news. I just got offered a job, a real job, doing the work I actually trained for. There was a pause. Then Janelle screamed so loud, Grace had to hold the phone away from her ear. Mom! Oh my God! Tell me everything! Grace laughed, feeling tears prick her eyes. I'll tell you tonight, but Jay, I need you to know something. All those times you told me I should stop waitressing and use my degrees. You were right. I was scared. I was playing it safe, but not anymore. I'm so proud of you, Janelle whispered. Mom, I'm so proud. They talked for a few more minutes, Grace sketching the broad outlines of what had happened, before hanging up so Janelle could get back to class. Then Grace called her son, Marcus, and had a similar conversation, his deep voice cracking with emotion as he congratulated her. When she finally put the phone away, Grace realized she was crying. Not sad tears, but something else. Something that felt like relief and triumph and terror all mixed together. She'd spent decades being careful, being small, being grateful for whatever opportunities came her way. She'd swallowed insults and smiled at dismissal and made herself invisible to survive. But today she'd been seen, really seen. And that changed everything. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. Grace gave her notice at the restaurant, and Daniel's reaction was exactly what she expected. Shock, then poorly concealed resentment that she was leaving for something better, then a grudging congratulations that fooled no one. Her co-workers were more genuine, a mix of happiness for her success and envy that she was escaping the grind they were still trapped in. Don't forget us when you're rich and famous, Sarah said on Grace's last shift, hugging her tight. I'm not going to be rich or famous, Grace protested. I'm just going to be doing the work I always wanted to do. That's the same thing, Sarah said wisely. For people like us, anyway. The contract arrived as promised, and Grace spent an entire evening reading, through it with Marcus, who was pre-law and had a good eye for problematic clauses. It was fair, more than fair. The salary was 3 times what she'd been making at the restaurant. The benefits included full health coverage, retirement contributions, and a professional development budget. And the autonomy clause gave her genuine authority over program design and implementation. Mom, Marcus said, looking up from the document with wide eyes, this is a really good contract. Like, they're really investing in you. I know, Grace said, still not quite believing it. Part of me keeps waiting for them to realize they made a mistake and take it back. They're not going to, Marcus said firmly. You earned this. You worked for this. Don't let anyone, including yourself, tell you different. Grace signed the contract that night and sent it back to Robert's legal team. 3 days later, she received confirmation of her employment and instructions to report to Hartwell Industries headquarters the following Monday. That Monday morning, Grace stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting her blazer for the 5th time. She'd bought 2 new professional outfits over the weekend, spending money she didn't really have, but couldn't afford not to spend. First impressions mattered, especially when you were walking into a corporate environment where you'd likely be the only black woman in most rooms. Her phone buzzed with a text from Janelle. "You've got this, Mom. Go show them what you can do. Love you." Grace smiled, pocketed her phone, and headed out. Hartwell Industries occupied a sleek glass tower in the city's business district. The lobby was all marble and steel, with a massive company logo on the wall and a security desk that looked like it belonged in a bank vault. Grace provided her name to the guard, who checked his tablet and nodded. "Ms. Morrison, yes. Mr. Hartwell is expecting you. Elevator to the 15th floor. Turn right when you exit. Someone will meet you there." The elevator ride felt like it took forever, Grace's stomach doing small flips as the numbers climbed. She'd been in corporate buildings before, but never as an executive, never as someone with actual authority. The imposter syndrome was real and loud, whispering that she didn't belong here, that someone would figure out she was just a waitress playing dress-up. She told that voice to shut up. The elevator doors opened to reveal a bright, modern office space with an open floor plan. A young woman in her 20s approached immediately, smiling warmly. "Ms. Morrison, I'm Alicia, Mr. Hartwell's executive assistant. He's in a meeting right now, but he asked me to give you a tour and get you settled. Welcome to Hartwell Industries." The tour was overwhelming in the best way. Alicia showed her the research labs, the development workshops, the conference facilities, and finally, a large corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city skyline. "This is your office," Alicia said, opening the door. Grace stopped in the doorway, staring. "My office? This whole space?" "Mr. Hartwell was very specific," Alicia said. "You need room for meetings, for reviewing movement demonstrations, and for your own work. He said to tell you that if you need anything else, different furniture, equipment, whatever, just let me know and we'll make it happen." Grace walked into the space slowly, taking it in. There was a large desk with a state-of-the-art computer, a comfortable seating area with a couch and chairs, and an open space clearly designed for physical movement. On the desk was a small potted plant and a note in Robert's handwriting. "Looking forward to seeing what you build. R." "Ms. Morrison," Alicia said gently, "are you okay?" Grace realized she was crying again. She really needed to get that under control. "I'm fine," she said, wiping her eyes. This is a lot." "It's really great what you're doing," Alicia said. "I have a cousin with muscular dystrophy. He's 12, and he hates his physical therapy sessions. I told my aunt about your program, and she's really hopeful that it might help. There are a lot of families who need this." Grace took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Then we'd better get to work," she said. Over the next several months, Grace built her program from the ground up. She hired a team of 3 other movement therapists, each bringing different expertise and perspectives. She partnered with local children's hospitals to recruit pilot program participants. She designed protocols, wrote training manuals, and created assessment tools to measure progress. And she worked with Lily. 3 times a week, Lily came to the Hartwell Industries facility for specialized sessions. Sometimes it was just the 2 of them. Sometimes other children from the pilot program joined them. Grace watched Lily transform from a withdrawn, hesitant child into someone vibrant and confident. "Look, Miss Grace," Lily shouted one afternoon, using her arms to lift herself slightly out of her wheelchair during a particularly complex movement sequence. "I'm flying." "You absolutely are," Grace said, her heart swelling with pride. "You're amazing, Lily." But not everything was smooth. Grace had been right that there would be resistance. 6 months into the program, she was called to present preliminary findings to the Hartwell Industries Board of Directors. Robert had warned her this was coming, had coached her on what to expect, but nothing quite prepared her for walking into that boardroom. 12 people sat around a massive table, most of them white men over 50. A few women, all white. Grace was the only person of color in the room, and the weight of that was immediately obvious in the way eyes tracked her entrance, in the slight stiffening of postures. "Ladies and gentlemen, Robert said from his position at the head of the table. "This is Dr. Grace Morrison, director of our therapeutic movement. Initiative. Grace, you know most of the board, but for anyone you haven't met..." He went through quick introductions. Grace nodded politely, recognizing some names from the business press. These were people who controlled millions, sometimes billions. People who could kill her program with a single vote. "Dr. Morrison," said a man named Henderson, who Robert had warned her was particularly skeptical, "we've reviewed the budget projections for your program. $7 million over 3 years. That's a significant investment for something that hasn't been proven at scale." "It's a significant investment in children's lives," Grace replied evenly. "And while the full-scale outcomes will take time to measure, our preliminary results are extremely promising." She pulled up her presentation on the room's main screen. "In the past 6 months, we've worked with 43 children aged 5 to 14 with various mobility challenges. We've measured improvements in gross motor function, fine motor coordination, and range of motion that exceed traditional therapy outcomes by an average of 37%. The numbers filled the screen, backed by graphs and statistical analysis. Grace had made sure everything was rigorous, replicable, defensible. "But more importantly," Grace continued, "we've measured improvements in psychological well-being that traditional therapy doesn't address. Depression and anxiety scores have dropped by an average of 52%. School attendance and performance have improved. Family stress levels have decreased. These children aren't just moving better, they're living better." She pulled up video footage now. Children in wheelchairs, children with braces and prosthetics, children with cerebral palsy and muscular dystrophy, all moving to music, all smiling, all clearly engaged in a way that went far beyond rote physical therapy exercises. "This is what $7 million buys," Grace said quietly. "It buys hope. It buys dignity. It buys the message that these children are capable of joy and beauty, not just incremental improvement in clinical metrics." Henderson looked unmoved. "Dr. Morrison, I don't doubt your passion, but Hartwell Industries is a business, not a charity. How does this translate into revenue?" Grace had prepared for this question. "3 ways," she said. "First, we're developing new adaptive equipment based on what we learn in these sessions. Equipment that will be better than anything currently on the market because it's informed by what children actually want to use, not just what therapists think they need. Second, we're creating a licensing model for our protocols that other facilities can implement, generating ongoing revenue. And third," she paused, making sure she had everyone's attention. "Third, we're building brand loyalty with families who will remember that Hartwell Industries cared about their children's quality of life, not just their diagnosis codes. These families make healthcare decisions for decades. Creating positive associations now will translate into market share later." Robert was nodding, and Grace could see a few other board members looking thoughtful, but Henderson wasn't done. "I notice most of your staff are diverse," he said, the word coming out like he'd tasted something sour. "Is that a deliberate choice?" Grace felt the room tense. This was the moment Robert had warned her about. The moment when someone would question not her competence, but her right to be there, dressed up in language about culture fit or optics, or, in this case, deliberate choice. She could play it safe, she could deflect, she could smile and say something about hiring the best candidates regardless of background. But Grace Morrison had spent too many years playing it safe. "Yes," she said firmly, "it's absolutely deliberate. The communities most affected by mobility challenges are disproportionately Black and brown. They're the communities with less access to quality care, less representation in medical research, and less belief that the healthcare system actually cares about them. If we want to reach those communities, and we should, both morally and strategically, we need a team that looks like them, understands their concerns, and can build trust. So, yes, I deliberately hired diverse staff, and I'll continue to do so." The silence was deafening. Henderson's face had gone red. I think, Robert interrupted, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "that Dr. Morrison has articulated exactly why this program is important and why she's the right person to lead it. The preliminary results speak for themselves. The business case is sound, and unless anyone has substantive objections, and I mean substantive, not ideological, I'm recommending we fully fund the next phase of development." He looked around the table, his expression making it very clear that this was not actually a request. One by one, the board members nodded or murmured agreement. Henderson looked like he wanted to object further, but apparently thought better of it. "Excellent," Robert said. "Grace, thank you for the presentation. We'll formalize the funding authorization this week." As the board members filed out, several stopped to shake Grace's hand or murmur congratulations. Henderson pushed past without making eye contact. When the room was empty except for Grace and Robert, he turned to her with a slight smile. "You handled that well," he said. Grace let out a long breath. "I probably made an enemy of Henderson." "Henderson was already opposed," Robert said. "But you won over the people who were undecided. That's what matters. And Grace, what you said about community trust, about representation, that needed to be said. I should have said it myself months ago." "You hired me," Grace pointed out. "That was saying it. Hiring you was the easy part," Robert said. "Supporting you when people like Henderson push back, that's where the real commitment shows. And I want you to know, I'm committed. This program, your vision, your leadership, I believe in all of it." Grace felt that tightness in her chest again, that overwhelming sense of being seen and valued. "Thank you," she said quietly. Over the next year, the Therapeutic Movement Initiative grew beyond Grace's wildest expectations. They expanded to serve over 200 children. They published 3 peer-reviewed papers documenting their outcomes. They developed 2 new pieces of adaptive equipment that won industry awards. And they trained therapists at 17 other facilities across the country to implement their protocols. But the moment that mattered most to Grace came on a sunny afternoon in May, 14 months after that day on the restaurant terrace. Lily Hartwell, now 9 years old, stood in the center of the program's main studio, supported by specialized braces that Grace's team had helped design. Around her, 20 other children formed a circle, some in wheelchairs, some with prosthetics, some with conditions that made every movement a challenge, and they were all dancing. Grace stood at the edge of the studio, watching as her staff guided the children through a routine they'd been practicing for weeks. The movements were adapted to each child's abilities, but the result was unified, beautiful, a celebration of what was possible rather than a catalog of limitations. Robert stood beside her, and Grace could see tears in his eyes as he watched his daughter move with confidence and joy. "Look at her," he whispered. "She's so happy." "She's remarkable," Grace agreed. "Because of you," Robert said. "Because you saw her, really saw her, that day in the restaurant. Because you believed she deserved more than what we were giving her." Grace shook her head. "I just gave her the tools. She did the work. They all did." As the routine reached its finale, all 20 children moved in synchronization. Some spinning their wheelchairs, some raising their arms, some shifting their weight in carefully practiced patterns. It wasn't perfect. Several children stumbled or lost the rhythm, but it didn't matter because the joy was real, the effort was real, and the message was unmistakable. These children were capable of beauty. When the music ended, the studio erupted in applause. Parents who'd been watching from the observation area were crying and cheering. Staff members were hugging each other. And the children were beaming with pride. Lily wheeled herself over to where Grace and Robert stood. "Did you see Miss Grace? Did you see us?" "I saw you," Grace said, crouching down to Lily's eye level. "You were absolutely magnificent." "I want to show everyone," Lily said, her eyes bright with excitement. "I want every kid who has a wheelchair or braces or anything. I want them to know they can dance too." Robert looked at Grace over his daughter's head, and something passed between them, an understanding, a shared purpose. "Then that's what we'll do," Grace said. "We'll show them." 3 months later, Grace stood on a stage at a national healthcare conference, presenting their work to an audience of over 1,000 professionals. She'd come a long way from the restaurant terrace, from the woman who'd learned to make herself small and invisible to survive others' judgment. As she clicked through slides showing the children's progress, showing the data that proved what she'd always known, that every child deserved to be seen as capable, as worthy, as full of potential, Grace thought about Philip Carmichael. She wondered if he'd heard about the program, about its success. She wondered if he'd recognized his own role in setting these events in motion. Probably not. People like Philip Carmichael rarely saw beyond their own perspective, rarely understood how their cruelty could backfire so spectacularly. But that was okay. Grace hadn't done this work for revenge or to prove Philip wrong. She'd done it because a little girl had asked her to dance, and Grace had said yes. Everything else had flowed from that one choice, that one moment of seeing possibility instead of limitation, of choosing connection over fear. In conclusion, Grace said to the assembled healthcare professionals, we've demonstrated that adaptive dance therapy can significantly improve both physical and psychological outcomes for children with mobility challenges. But beyond the statistics, beyond the clinical metrics, what we've really proven is this. Every child deserves to be celebrated for what they can do, not defined by what they can't. Every child deserves joy. Every child deserves to dance. The applause was thunderous. As Grace left the stage, she passed Robert and Lily in the front row. Robert was clapping hard, his face reflecting pride and gratitude. And Lily was bouncing in her wheelchair, dancing even while sitting down, unable to contain her happiness. Grace paused beside them. "Thank you," she said simply to both of them. "Thank you for taking a chance on me." "Thank you," Robert replied, "for taking a chance on us, for seeing what Lily could become and helping her get there." Later that evening, after the conference sessions ended, Grace sat in her hotel room, scrolling through emails. There were congratulations from colleagues, questions from other facilities wanting to implement the program, and interview requests from several medical journals. But the message that made her smile was from Sarah, her old coworker from the restaurant. "Saw your presentation online. Holy shit, Grace, you're famous. So proud of you. Wish I'd known I was working with someone so brilliant. We all just thought you were really good at remembering orders. Love you." Grace laughed out loud. The humble waitress, the invisible service worker, the woman who'd been dismissed and insulted and told she was inappropriate, that person still existed somewhere, in Grace's memory, but she wasn't that person anymore, or rather, she was that person plus all the other versions of herself she'd never been allowed to be. She was Dr. Grace Morrison, award-winning researcher and program director. She was the woman who'd changed Lily Hartwell's life and the lives of hundreds of other children. She was the woman who'd proven that dignity and recognition weren't gifts to be granted by others, but rights to be claimed for yourself. And most importantly, she was the woman who'd said yes when a little girl asked her to dance. Grace closed her laptop and looked out at the city lights below her hotel window. Tomorrow, she'd fly home. Tomorrow, she'd return to the work, to the children, to the constant challenge of building something meaningful in a world that often resisted change. But tonight, she allowed herself to simply feel grateful for opportunities seized, for chances taken, for the mysterious alchemy that transforms one moment of kindness into something that ripples outward, changing lives in ways you never could have predicted. Sometimes justice comes in thunderous, dramatic reversals, in villains exposed and underdogs triumphant. But sometimes it comes quietly, incrementally, in the accumulation of small choices that gradually reshape the world into something better. Grace had experienced both kinds, and she was ready for whatever came next.